last week G20 leaders meeting in Rome is loudly echoed here at COP26. In addition, this event is a great opportunity to explore how the livestock sector can positively contribute to climate, food security, and nutrition. Livestock provide nearly 33% of proteins to human diet. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, livestock contribute around 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emission, half in the form of methane, especially for ruminants as cattle, sheep, and goats. Methane is a live, fast, die young greenhouse gas. Although it is more potent than carbon dioxide in terms of global warming, methane is broken down after about a dozen years, while CO2 stays in the atmosphere for centuries. Curbing methane emission from livestock is a massive opportunity to tackle the climate crisis. Indeed, reducing methane is high on the COP26 agenda as part of national action with quick wins. Ladies and gentlemen, the LEAP is a pioneering and successful multi-stakeholder partnership that provides evidence-based climate-smart solutions to boost action on climate and the broader environment. With a wide range of stakeholders from the feed and livestock sectors, governments, the private sector, NGOs and CSOs, academia and international organizations, LEAP serves as an action network to the global agenda for sustainable livestock. I am pleased to note that LEAP, through its technical work on methodology development, has informed UNFCCC Coroniva joint work on agriculture, highlighting the importance of agriculture to climate solution. The LEAP partnership will certainly contribute to the FAO strategic framework to the next decade, focusing on transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, and better environment, and a better life, leaving no one behind. Today, we learn about cutting-edge science on novel metrics to assess methane emission, pioneered through the LEAP Methane Technical Advisory Group. This new knowledge can help reshape the narrative on livestock, inspire governments to raise their climate ambition through their national determined contribution, and turn the challenge of transitioning towards climate-neutral livestock systems a reality. Together, we can leap ahead and get back on track to achieve the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. I wish you a successful and fruitful event. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Meadow, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate your remarks and to have us with have you with us today. So thank you for that. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tim McAllister, which is Principal Scientist at Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, and also the LEAP Chair for 2021. Is an active member of the LEAP Technical Advisory Groups on larger ruminants, water use, biodiversity, and methane, and he will present his welcoming remarks. The floor is yours, Tim.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. Well, as chair of the LEAP Steering Committee, I just want to say what an honor it is to have the opportunity to showcase the accomplishments of LEAP and how it has contributed to the sustainability of global livestock systems. LEAP has outlined the sources of greenhouse gas emissions in livestock production and proposed best management practices that can be used to mitigate these emissions and improve the efficiency of livestock production on a global scale. At the same time, it's recognized the role that ruminant livestock play in the production of food from grassland ecosystems and the key role that these lands play in carbon sequestration and storage, a key pathway identified in the Paris Accord to lowering atmospheric CO2 levels. LEAP has engaged scientific experts throughout the world with an emphasis on the development of guidelines that consider the regional diversity that exists within livestock production systems. LEAP has not undertaken this work in a vacuum and has worked hand in hand with other organizations, including FAO's Office on Climate and Biodiversity, the Global Research Alliance, Climate Smart Agriculture, the Life Cycle Initiative, the Global Soil Partnership, and the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock. Canada and several other countries around the world are now using these LEAP guidelines to define sustainability within their specific livestock systems. The strength of LEAP arises from the partnership that involves governments, private sector, civil society, and NGOs. Guidelines are ultimately designed to provide guidance to livestock practitioners, and it is ultimately those that manage the livestock and the land that will influence their contribution to climate action. So today's event will showcase a number of the LEAP activities. There's our agenda. I put it up on the screen now with a focus on methane assessment. We have a large tag involving over 100 scientists that are currently working in that area for climate solutions related to methane and livestock production. It will emphasize the need even for greater collaboration among members of the livestock sector and the need of the livestock sector to continue to set goals that contribute to climate solutions and healthy ecosystems. Thank you much.
Thank you very much, Tim, for those remarks. So let's start without any delay, considering a squeeze on time. I'd like to invite our keynote speaker today, which is Dr. Michael Cain. She's the co-leader of the FAO Technical Advisory Group on Methane and lecturer in environmental analytics at the Cranfield University in the UK. Dr. Cain's core expertise is in greenhouse gases, air pollution, and climate science. Her current research focuses on the role of greenhouse gas other than carbon dioxide in limiting global warming. So Dr. Cain, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'll just try and share my screen. Oh, I have to allow permission. Sorry. Here we go. Just 1 second. It needs permission for me to share my screen on this particular platform.
Could the room manager give please the authorization of Mrs. Cain to share a screen?
I think it's, here we go. I think I've got it. Is that working yet?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Right, I should just open that up. So I can't see any of your faces now. So give me a shout if anything's going wrong or you can't hear me or anything. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk about the technical advisory group on methane that the FAO has set up. I'm one of the co-chairs of this, and we've been working on a report this best part of this year, and so I'm going to talk to you about the motivation for this and the work that we've been doing. So the composition of the technical advisory group on methane of the FAO is very, very broad. So we've got a core group of 59 experts. The expertise represented within that is really quite broad. Animal, crop and soil sciences, also life cycle assessment, environmental science and climate science, and also some specialists on emissions metrics, which I'll go on to talk about. And so we formed in February this year, and we've been asked to produce a technical report with the objective of better informing greenhouse gas assessments, instrumental to mitigation strategies, and comparisons between sectors and products. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've interpreted this at next. So the scope of the report, we decided to cover these topics: sources of methane, methane sinks, quantification of methane emissions, measurement of methane, then estimation of methane emissions and mitigation of methane emissions, and metrics. So metrics is probably the one that needs most explanation. So I'm going to focus on that. Metrics are, when I say metrics, I'm referring to greenhouse gas emission metrics. And these are ways that we can compare methane emissions to other emissions. So each different greenhouse gas has different properties, and somehow we want to evaluate them with respect to one another. So we use metrics to convert methane emissions and other emissions like nitrous oxide emissions into CO2 equivalent. And I'm sure most people have seen CO2 equivalent emissions in graphs or tables or reports. So I'll take you over a little bit of the motivation for this report, because some of this is not new. There are plenty of reports on methane sources. So why are we doing this report at this time? Well, livestock and rice production account for over 40% of all anthropogenic methane emission sources. So clearly, when there is a goal to reduce methane emissions, these are important sectors. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, but it's also very short-lived. So its half-life is about 10 years. And that means that if you emit a ton of methane, in 10 years' time, about half of it will have been destroyed through chemical reactions. And so that's very different from CO2. So CO2 has permanent climate implications. If you emit a ton of CO2, that is going to stay in the atmosphere and it's going to keep temperatures elevated essentially permanently for hundreds of years, if not longer. So the difference between methane and CO2 is that if you emit a ton of CO2, it's permanent, the impacts are permanent, whereas unless you're able to then remove it, through some anthropogenic removals, so direct air capture, for example, and storage. Methane emissions, the impacts are not permanent, at least they're largely not permanent. So I'll go on to talk about that next, and also what that means for how we assess methane. So I want to go through this with an example about how methane and CO2 differ. So it's a very simple example. What I've got here is an emissions profile, emissions of CO2 equivalent. So that could be CO2 or it could be methane converted to CO2 equivalent, but it's the same total. So we start off with 0 emissions and then it ramps up from 1950 to 2000. Then we have a period of a few years at a maximum emissions, and then we reduce emissions again down to 0 in 2050. So here we've got the emissions profile in CO2 equivalent emissions. And what the question I want to ask is, how would these emissions impact the temperature if we modeled these in a climate model? And does it matter if we emit CO2 with this profile or if we emit methane with this profile? And so we've run both of those things through a simple climate model. The amount of methane to emit is calculated by working out how much is the CO2 equivalence of that methane. So you have a methane emission, and if you multiply it by the emissions metric GWP 100, which is global warming potential over 100 years, and that is the standard metric used by UNFCCC and all across the world for working out CO2 equivalent emissions, you can work out your methane emission that is equivalent to the CO2 emission. So the question we want to look at is whether this gives you the same answer, whether or not it's methane or CO2. And so we modeled this. It's in a paper by Lynch et al. Published this year. And you can see from the graph, the warming graph, the answer is quite different if you emit methane or CO2. So I'll go through this in turn. So firstly, if we emit those emissions as CO2, pure CO2, we get the dark blue line. And so you get an increase in temperature following where we start to emit CO2. And then, in fact, when we get to 2050, that is when the temperature plateaus. So it's not until we get down to 0 CO2 emissions that the temperature plateaus. And so that's the science behind why we need net zero CO2 emissions to stop warming, because every ton of CO2 we emit adds more to the temperature. Then if we look at methane in yellow, you can see it's a very, very different picture. We actually get a more rapid increase in temperature in the early years where we're ramping up those emissions, and the peak is much higher. The peak is almost twice as high as the CO2 peak in temperature. So you can see methane actually generates much more warming that is represented under GWP 100 here. But then the curve turns very rapidly. And so once we start to reduce methane emissions, because of its short half-life, actually the amount of methane in the atmosphere goes down soon after. And so we get this rapid decline in temperature. And a lot of the warming that's happened from these methane emissions is reversed. And so I'll just highlight the key part of this graph in blue. This is the period when methane and CO2 emissions are being reduced. And so in the CO2, we're reducing CO2 emissions over time, but temperature is still going up. Whereas for methane, in that period where we're reducing methane emissions, the temperature starts to go down again. So those effects of methane are short-lived. And then you can see beyond that, after we've got zero emissions, after the end of the blue shaded area, temperature continues to reduce for methane as the remaining methane in the atmosphere is destroyed through chemical reactions, and that's not the case for CO2. So you can see from this that equivalent emissions of CO2 and methane based on GWP 100 don't cause the same level of warming. And that's because GWP 100 is a metric that measures or encapsulates the total energy added to the system over the whole 100-year period. So it's not trying to reproduce the warming. And so, in fact, the GWP 100 is based on the same science and the same models that are used right here on this graph. It's just capturing a different aspect. So what does this mean for us? Well, the implications of this are that standard CO2 equivalence doesn't accurately represent methane's contribution to global warming. It undervalues warming from new methane emissions by 4 to 5 times over the initial 20-year period after the emission occurs. It overvalues the warming from stable methane emissions by 3 to 4 times. And it undervalues the temperature reduction that you get from eliminating a methane source by 4 to 5 times in that first 20-year period after you remove the source. So it doesn't have that direct link to temperature. So there have been in recent years some new step pulse metrics they're often described as. I don't have time to go into the details of why they're called that or what it means exactly, but they're new developments to metrics which capture methane's contribution to global warming better. And so if you're interested in the details, this particular section of the latest IPCC assessment report, Working Group 1, describes 3 of those metrics. One GWP star, which I have worked on, and also combined global temperature potential and combined global warming potential, CGTP and CGWP. So the report discusses those metrics in a lot more detail, and because they have been published in recent years, this is one of the reasons that motivated this particular metrics report. How can we use these? Can they be useful in considering the livestock sector and rice sector? So I just want to summarise that each emission metric is based on the same climate science fundamentally, but each metric is capturing different impacts arising from an emission. So in a way, they're all accurate, but they might not be answering the question that you're actually looking for. So different metrics may be useful to answer different kinds of questions. And so it's clear that there's no one metric which is universally applicable to every single question, because they're all representing slightly different things. So the TAG report, we're including a chapter on metrics, and these are the topics that we're aiming to cover. It's context and definitions of metrics, their use in mitigation applications, climate targets and related issues, guidance and worked examples. So we're trying to get something more practical in there. Currently, it is a work in progress, so we haven't agreed the content of the report amongst the many authors. And so we're aiming to be ready for peer review before the end of this year. So I won't be able to answer questions about specific things that we're going to include or not, because it hasn't been agreed. And so with that, I'd like to thank you very much. I've included the references from my talk here, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for your presentation. And I understand that our colleagues on YouTube are only getting the sound and not the images. So if you are interested to receive the slides afterward, or if you do have any questions or comments, I would encourage you to send them to livestock-partnership@fao.org, where the LEAP Secretariat will be receiving your messages. So thank you. So we will continue, because we haven't received yet question to Michelle. So we'll continue with the program. And when we do receive question, we'll come back to you, Michelle, and any of our other speaker. So Camillo, are you on the line or not? Okay, so Camillo doesn't seem to be on the line right now. So what we will do is that I will ask our technician to start the video from Mrs. Sandra Vin from WWF International. She's a member of LEAP Technical Advisory Group on Biodiversity, and she has prepared a video for us. So if the room manager could play that video recording, that would be great.
Thank you for the invitation to share our video message during this side event at the COP26. So how can livestock become a solution to a major part of the climate crisis? We need systematic changes across production, consumption, alongside loss, waste, and disposal. We need nature-positive and regenerative production practices, but also to halt deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystems for the sake of feed production. South American soy is a common feed ingredient for livestock systems in Europe and Asia. The expansion of soy into natural ecosystems such as forests, grasslands, and savannas of the Amazon, Cerrado, and Gran Chaco leads to significant greenhouse gas emissions, but also degradation of native habitats and our soils, as well as loss of biodiversity. Local communities have been forced off their indigenous lands due to land grabbing and tenure issues, and other human rights and labor rights issues are hidden across opaque supply chains. The carbon footprint of soybean used in 2018 for animal feed in Asia and Europe emitted an estimated 465 million tons of CO2 equivalent, 81% of which were related to changes in land use. So pig and poultry for meat production are the largest users of the soybean meal, followed by beef, dairy, and aquaculture. Palm and soy ingredients in the European and Asian market would be 15% of the total feed production emissions, or around 6% of the total greenhouse gas emissions of livestock. For companies that market predominantly animal-based foods, this could be a big chunk of their overall footprint. Consumption of animal-based protein is expected to increase rapidly in the coming decades. This is why commitments by government and the private sector to stopping conversion of forests and other natural ecosystems are so important. It's encouraging to see that yesterday, more than 100 government leaders announced their commitments to halt deforestation and conversion. Many companies in the private sector have also made commitments to set science-based targets, and an increasing number is committing to halting deforestation and conversion. The spotlight is now on the agricultural sector, and food and retail companies who have a key role to play and must take action on nature to meet net zero targets. Meeting science-based targets without including nature-based solutions, or without taking deforestation and conversion out of our food and feed supply chains, will be impossible to achieve. Most of South American soy is already produced without recent land conversion. But given a lack of traceability and transparency, greenhouse gas emissions cannot be properly estimated at a granular level. So this actually may result in unintended consequences. Companies with greenhouse gas targets may shift sourcing to other areas to lower the greenhouse gas footprint. This may lead to ecosystem conversion in these other places. For example, plow-up of grasslands in the North American Great Plains and across Africa are both on the rise. So for governments and the private sector, it's essential to ensure good due diligence includes traceability and transparency of the origin, and geolocation, which can be achieved with tools, including satellite imagery. Whole supply chains need to be transparent and linked to proper enforcement at state levels, which means states need to provide proper resources. Other issues such as land tenure, human rights need to be addressed as well. Incentives and rewards for producers to change practices needs to be front and center, including long-term contracts, financial support, and other support mechanisms. So proving that livestock and feed products are produced in ways which are nature positive, net zero emissions, free of deforestation and conversion, and human rights abuses will become even more important in the decade ahead. So WWF is working with a range of partners to develop guidance for setting science-based targets for forests, lands, and agriculture, called the SBTI FLAG project, with a final guidance document to be released in early 2023. In the meantime, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is being updated to include guidance for counting and reporting of land sector and removals. Direct land use change is included in it. Now, building on the existing body of work, LEAP could play a key role in providing relevant tools and assessment guidance for the livestock supply chains to set baselines, track progress towards goals and targets, and establish standards for credible, transparent reporting. This would go a long way toward advancing livestock contribution to the goal of boosting nature-positive production for a more food-secure world. Time is running out. We must join forces to address these interconnected challenges. Thank you for listening to this video message.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for this message. We're very happy that you were able to share your views on this event. Unfortunately, it was difficult to get everybody registered for the event due to constraint from the organization of the COP. Apologize for the technique as well. We don't have control over that, so we're trying to do the best we can. So our colleague Camillo is not able to rejoin the platform for now. So if you could put the slide up, I would do it for him. So can the room manager put the slides you have for Camillo on screen? So Camillo is a manager of the LEAP platform. As mentioned by Mrs. Semedo, LEAP is the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership, and LEAP has developed over the years numbers of tools that we actually call guidelines to deliver on the work that we're trying to do. So the objective of LEAP is to build common ground to understand and assess the environmental impact from livestock system, foster evidence-based climate action and environmental improvement for the sustainable livestock through the application of the FAO LEAP guidelines. So as we always say, we can manage what we can measure, and the role of LEAP is to provide those tools for the sector to use in their action. Since 2012, LEAP has actually now, it's going to start its fourth one. We have delivered on a number of guides that you can see on the website of LEAP, and several of them are very, very useful for this discussion. You've got one on feed, you've got some on large ruminant poultry, pigs, biodiversity, feed additive, nutrients, soil, carbon, water use, and we just mentioned the work we're doing on methane and the feed crop database that have been developed by LEAP. So all of those tools are available to all. They are free of charge, so you can access them on our website and use it as you see fit in your country. Again, we will provide the detailed slides because I won't be able to go into details as Camillo will have done it. But we will share those slides with those who ask for it on the Livestock platform website. We also have a group working on soil carbon storage. So this is also very important for this work, as well as a catalog of application. And we're always looking for different countries to test the model and to give us your feedback so we can improve as we go along in the development of guidelines. We are starting in 22 LEAP 4, which is the 4 cycle of LEAP work, planning to work on ecosystem services, so the positive contribution of livestock to environment, direct land and use change, circular bioeconomy, and leather. And again, we are a multi-stakeholder platform, so always looking for stakeholders from different government, private sector, civil society to join us in our work. So I would like to thank you on behalf of Camillo for listening to that short presentation. And I will like to move directly to the panel discussion. We do have 3 panelists today, and the title of the panel is the acceleration of action across production system. So I'd like to welcome Tim McAllister, that you've already met earlier, from Canada and the lead chair in 2021. Mr. Hsin Huang, Secretary General of International Meat Secretariat, and Mr. Gonzalo Becona, member of the country delegation of Uruguay and principal scientist at the Instituto Nacional de Investigación Agropecuaria. So I do not see Gonzalo. Is he pinned as a speaker? So we could open his microphone, please. Okay, so we have 4 questions for you. We do have slides, but I don't know what happened with slides, so I'm going to try to work without it. So we have 4 questions for our panelists. The first one is, how do you see the role of livestock in the climate action? The second question is, what are the main solutions to curb methane emission from livestock? Third question, what are the main challenges to the uptake of such solution and how to overcome them? And the last question, how do you see the role of FAO-LEAP partnership for action at country level? So if I could give you the floor first, Tim, and then I move to Hsin and maybe Gonzalo, if we can find him.
Sure, thanks very much, Carolyn. So, what is the role of livestock in climate action? Well, we know that livestock during their production result in the production of greenhouse gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Technologies are emerging that can be used to reduce these emissions, with many livestock organizations using the metrics as outlined in approaches in LEAP to measure and adopt technologies to mitigate these emissions. At the same time, ruminants play a really important role in the preservation of grassland ecosystems. And we've heard about the preservation of forests as part of the COP26 and what we've heard coming out of the meeting so far. But we also need to think about preservation of grassland ecosystems as well, and a reduction of their conversion through cultivation into cropland. That process in itself releases vast quantities of carbon from the soil. And at the same time, these grassland ecosystems contribute to other ecosystem services like biodiversity, recreation, aesthetic value, etc. Livestock can also play a key role in the upcycling of food waste and byproducts that would be likely destined for landfills or potentially biodigesting or composting if they weren't used as livestock feed. Those procedures, such as putting that waste material, that what we would call byproducts or food waste landfills, would also contribute to methane emissions from those landfill systems. So all of those practices enable us to redirect that material towards the production of food in the form of meat and milk, and avoid the emissions that would be associated with it if we just disposed of it. Ruminants can also play a role in fire prevention in forest ecosystems, where they remove the fine fuels that often act as the initial accelerants to these severe fires that we're experiencing in many regions of the world as well. And then ruminants also occupy a unique niche in that they can produce high quality protein in the form of meat and milk from forages and in ecosystems of which produce the types of plant material that would be unsuitable for human consumption in terms of direct food and entrance into the human food chain. So I don't know if you want me to go through all of the questions, Carolyn, or if you want me to let Hsin have some comment on.
Yes, let's move to Hsin and Gonzalo. He is actually in the studio, so he's the person you see with the black background. So good to see you, Gonzalo. So then we'll be able to move to him after Hsin. So Hsin, you wanna comment maybe on the his question?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm Hsin Huang of the International Meat Secretariat, and we basically, to tell you who we are, represent mainly national livestock producer associations at national level around the world. And the role of livestock is really important in climate change. That's why we're here today. That's what we're here to discuss, but it is much, much broader than just climate change. I think we all want to do the right thing for climate. There is no question about that, including the livestock sector. And we have, been accused of being a large contributor to climate change. But let's put things into context. All human activities are large contributors to climate change. And what's important going forward is for the livestock sector to really make significant steps in being part of the solution and not just be blamed as part of the problem. Livestock then is responsible for many aspects beyond just the very narrow focus of climate change. There's the whole topic of sustainable development, meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are also about food and nutrition security. We're also very concerned about the environment in general, not just climate, but also water, air, land, resource use, forest fires, as Tim just mentioned, flood prevention, extreme weather events. And we also have to meet consumer expectations like every other human activity. If we do not have the support of the consumer in terms of wanting to purchase our product, in terms of consuming it, then we are failing. So without trying to get away from the hard issues, because there are a lot of hard issues that the livestock sector must tackle, I just want to really underline that the sector is cognizant of these criticisms, these problems, and that tremendous efforts are being undertaken around the world to address these very, very difficult questions. So just let me very quickly, and then I'll give the others a bit of a chance to speak, but to continue on the idea of the context of livestock, a lot has been said about ruminants and their essential role in using resources that are generally not usable for other uses, for example, on lands. In many cases, ruminants are on land that you cannot grow crops on, for example. But let me also talk about the monogastrics, about chickens, pigs. And these animals we are feeding. Yes, we are feeding with things that could be used for human food, but we are also largely feeding with things that we choose not to eat for human food, and we are also feeding with things that we cannot eat for human food.
I don't think so, to be honest.
There are a lot of things that livestock can participate in as part of the circular economy, in which we make wiser use of all of our resources. Just to quote you a single number, it's an FAO staff calculation. More than 80%, I believe it's 86% is the exact number, on a dry matter basis, globally, of feedstock that's given to livestock is not consumed by humans, okay? More than 86%. All right, so basically, we want to continue, and we've been doing it for many years now, and this is not a problem that we've suddenly recognized now for COP26. We've been working together with LEAP for more than 10 years now on assessment of environmental impact, but we're basically working together collectively with NGOs, with governments, research institutions, etc., to work on ways to find solutions to improve the efficiency of livestock, efficiency for circularity of resource use, efficiency for carbon sequestration in pasture lands, efficiency in environmental outcomes, and efficiency in providing good nutritional protein, animal source foods to meet human nutrition. So there are many positive contributions to livestock, and you will forgive me if I focus on the positive, because I hear so much only about the negative, and there's also so much positive. Madam Chair, let me stop there for a moment and give the others also a chance to say something.
Thank you very much, Hsin. And it is important to remind as well of the positive contribution and the energy that is being put in the last years to improve and find solution and be innovative. So I'd like to hear a bit more from a colleague from Uruguay, Gonzalo. You have the floor.
Thank you, Caroline. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. the idea is to answer the 4 questions or just one by one?
Actually, you have since you're the last one, I give you the chance to answer the 4th one in a row, so then we can come back to the others with the other question.
Okay, so going to the first question is about the livestock in actions, climate actions. I think that it's a big challenge for livestock sector, all the impact that they have and all the science, as Tim says and other colleagues mentioned, that science is correct and science have good assessment of what are the impacts of the livestock over the climate. But we cannot forget that also they play an important role in food security. And the CDG goals is one of the main goals that for the next people, the population and increasing the population has an important role to play. And as we know that we have impact over the climate, we also know that we have a lot of contribution to reduce all that the impact. As we say more times is we are part of the problem, but we are part of the solution. And I think that what most of our systems of livestock systems are in over native pastures, most of them in native grasslands, and it has an important role in maintaining the carbon over the soil. So, because we talk about reduce emissions, but also we need to reduce the emissions from the soil, and I think that the livestock play an important role in the production over the natural grasslands to keep all that stocks of carbon and keep all degradations and keep on all the biodiversity that maintains like our systems.
Thank you. Would you like to comment maybe on specific solution on to curb methane emission from livestock?
Yes, I think, let me see, when we talk about the big solution to reduce emission is to take out the animals. So it's a big mitigation option that all people talk and all people say that we need to go that directions. But for many countries, methane, livestock, and the methane, of course, is part of the economy. I mean, I'm from Uruguay, and we export more than 70% of our productions. So the implications to reduce emissions by taking out or reducing the amount of animals or the number of animals is not a way or a big solution for us. As for us, we think that one of the main solutions is to increase efficiency of the systems. And there we have a big gap still to go forward and to travel that journey, that I think that this is a big solution by increasing the efficiency of the systems, increasing quality of the pastures, we can reduce the intensity of the emissions of methane. And also we can keep on production and reducing those intensity is a big challenge that we have for our country. And I think that most of South American countries have the same challenge to increase efficiency, mainly in cattle systems, that is our big productions.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Hsin, would you like to add anything on the solution?
I mean, there are so many technical solutions that have been worked on over the past number of years. I mean, just to talk about two that are receiving a lot of press lately are basically feed supplements, seaweed or other or something that you add to the feed, and talking realistically, from moving from a research, a perfect lab situation where you get incredible results, to real field results, we're talking about 30% reduction already in methane emissions that are possible in real life if we apply some of these best techniques. So this is techniques that we now have on hand, but just require maybe another couple of years to bring to scale in major production systems. There are all kinds of And of course, you know, there are all kinds of other solutions that are very creative and inventive scientists are thinking of. But also, I don't want us to forget that there is a process of continuous improvement. And just in terms of yield improvement, every time you have in a modern production system a yield improvement that does not include increases in animal numbers in your herd, and this is actually the case for many modern production systems around the world, then you are in essence reducing greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of meat produced already. Okay. Afterwards, you will argue, yes, but if we keep increasing meat consumption, then the total increases. Yes, that's true. But we can work on these things together. There is also a lot of discussion about a more emphasis on sustainable diets. Well, let's have that discussion. The discussion on sustainable diets is about everything in the diet, and it's not just about meat. So just reducing meat is not necessarily also our meat or animal products is not necessarily just the right solution. Where are you getting your vitamin B12 from? So without trying to sound defensive about the role of livestock in the diet, the point is simply this. We either have a good diet or a bad diet, and that's based on everything that we consume. And let's have that discussion. And so really that brings me to the final point that I want to make about sustainable diets is livestock is an important contributor to reducing food waste. And we don't have time to go exactly into all the details of why that is right now, but suffice it to say, when we produce food, whether it's brewer's grains, sugar beet pulp, wheat bran, these other products, what do we do with that waste product? We feed it to livestock. That's reducing food waste. We do that with a lot of other things. Compound feed manufacturers are very, very creative in working on different ways of using things that otherwise would go in the garbage and create us a problem with methane emissions. So really there's a tremendous scope, all kinds of technologies that have been worked on over the years, technologies that are on the way, in which livestock can participate in reducing specifically greenhouse gas emissions, but also at the same time be much more efficient about resource use. And again, I repeat this word, circular economy. This is what we're all thinking of. This is what we must do for all human activity going forward, is thinking about the circularity. So let me stop here and give somebody else a chance to say something.
Thank you, Hsin. Tim, I'd like to hear you on the solution, but also if you could a bit about the funding and the importance of investment in research, both public and private, and the importance of having the investment in the livestock sector to ensure that we could actually continue to develop those sustainable solutions and practices.
Thanks, Carolyn. Sure. So in terms of reducing or curbing methane emissions, a lot of that does go back to improving production efficiency, both from a nutritional perspective as well as from a reproductive perspective. So if you have a cow that fails to become pregnant and produce an offspring, then that cow still emits those greenhouse gases over the period of time without producing meat or milk. So there's room in many areas of the world to still improve reproductive efficiency and nutrition. We also need to continue to work on controlling livestock diseases, both from an animal welfare and health perspective, but also an unhealthy animal produces emissions and produces less of those products in the form of meat and milk. And as Hsin mentioned, there's technologies that are being worked on all over the world in order to specifically target those microbes in the rumen that produce the methane to lower their activity and reduce the amount of methane emissions. And there's a number of technologies that are emerging that look very promising. And the system as well has taken the perspective of looking at a systems approach, which includes deriving value from the manure that these livestock produce in the form of biodigestion and the biogas that's produced from that process that then can be used for heating or power generation and offset the production of those energy sources from fossil fuels that are coming out of the ground. So livestock has a number of different roles to play, but in order for that to be realized, we do need investment from from the various sectors of society in order to support livestock production, to continue to support that research that will result in those improved efficiencies and lower emissions. Along with that, some of these technologies at this point in time, we really can only adopt or expect livestock producers to adopt those technologies that have a direct economic benefit in terms of reducing the amount of feed that's required to produce a given amount of milk or meat, which really relates to the profitability or the economic sustainability of livestock production. And we can't ask livestock producers to develop and adopt practices that are going to not be economically sustainable and will result in them basically going bankrupt and out of business. So there needs to be some incentives in place. In some cases, some of these technologies look like they may be linked to improved efficiency, but not all of them. And in those cases, we need investment that recognizes those practices that are leading to lower emissions, contributing to our climate change objectives, and rewarding livestock producers for adopting those practices. A really excellent example is what we're seeing in terms of grassland conversion. When we look at the economics of that land and the value that can be derived from crop production versus using grazing ruminants from an economic perspective, generally speaking, more money can be derived per hectare of land if that land is worked up and put into crops, if those crops can be grown under favorable climatic conditions. But that process in itself doesn't recognize the vast amounts of carbon that are released as a result of that cultivation, the alteration in biodiversity that occurs, such as the natural mosses, lichens, soil mites, etc., the fauna within the soil, the impact that has on soil health. All of those things are not recognized in terms of their sustenance if that land is left untouched and it's not underused, goes land use change and come under cultivation. So those kinds of things need to be recognized where livestock is making a positive contribution. Hsin mentioned that there are several examples like that, but the economic support needs to be there to make those practices readily adoptable by livestock practitioners.
Thank you. So maybe before we finish this panel, I'd like to hear you a little bit on the role of LEAP partnership and how it could help at national level to deliver on accelerating that action on climate. So maybe I can start with you, Tim, so we'll go back on the opposite side.
Well, I think Hsin made a really good point about, that climate change, greenhouse gases, that's part of the picture of livestock production, but it's far more complicated than that when you look at the system as a whole. And pulling those various metrics across that entire production system is not an easy task. And it really does involve and require the engagement of scientific experts across the world in each of those various disciplines in order to come up with a systematic approach to defining sustainability and what that means in terms of livestock production. And that's really been the role of LEAP is gathering that information from around the world, from various scientific experts, engaging those experts, and trying to provide clear guidelines that define sustainability, both in greenhouse gases, but also in biodiversity, carbon sequestration, nutrient management, manure management, etc. And now with this recent we've heard many of the announcements about many countries are contributing to a 30% reduction in methane emissions. And I think LEAP is timely now in the tag that they have struck on methane and methods of mitigation and measurement of that in livestock production systems in an anticipation of the challenges that we're going to face in that area. So I think integration of those metrics together and combining those into a systematic analysis that really gives an overall perspective of what constitutes globability and sustainability within livestock systems, and also providing that information on a regional basis. So it really needs to be tailored for the diversity of livestock production systems that are out there. And those livestock production systems have different goals depending upon where they are also located in the world. And that's why those recommendations and best management practices need to be specifically curtailed to those regional differences.
Thank you, Tim. Hsin?
Well, I would like to follow on Tim's comments on the necessity of a structure like LEAP to give us good science-based advice on guidelines for how to reduce environmental impact, how to maximize environmental benefit. And I want to underline, it's more than 10 years now that LEAP has existed. It's hosted by the FAO and has involved more than 200, is it closer to 300 or maybe even more of the best academics working in the field of livestock and environment. And so there's no other effort that exists around the world. There are many other groups, academic research institutions on their own doing this work, but LEAP is really the global umbrella that is pulling together all of this for the different production systems around the world. And then just finally to say that, not only does LEAP have this incredible academic validity around the world, but just also mention the necessity of recognizing the diversity of livestock production systems. And this is something that LEAP is also going to be it's very important to have science, is to deal with all these different production systems, different livestock species, different economic contexts, all of these things I think Tim has already mentioned, but just to make the point that, look, we have this tremendous potential just in sharing the existing technology, not even inventing anything new. And the best practices that we do now, if we were to apply that globally around the world, developed countries, developing countries across different production systems, there already we would have an incredible gain to be made, and LEAP can certainly help with that. And then, of course, we all want to be much more ambitious than that, to say that, well, let's go also beyond what we know today, but also towards new technologies and working out, even more efficient, more environmentally friendly, more climate-friendly ways of raising livestock. And I firmly believe that to do that, we need all hands on deck. So we need the academic institutions working on it individually. We need countries to work on it individually, but we also need for an umbrella like the FAO hosted LEAP to put this all together. And by the way, also part of a package for our activities in sustainable development under the Global Agenda for Sustainable Development, which we will hear about later as our final presentation, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Gonzalo, you have the last word on the panel.
Okay, thank you. Just to not to repeat what previous colleagues mentioned, and I agree with what Tim mentioned and the complexity about the other livestock systems around the world. And I think that LEAP made a really great effort to put all science together. Because if we want to improve something that cannot quantify, it's impossible to improve. And I think that what LEAP had been done in these years and is continue doing is putting all that science together, but not science and people with experience in livestock systems. So I think that that's really difference about what a lot of guidelines that we know around the world to quantify the impact that we already know. But this it has a main thing that it's people that really knows what's going on the systems and the complexity of those systems. So then I think that LEAP in the second phase make a big effort to make the road testings, and they realize that some things can be added to the guidelines. And I think that now the issue, and I think it's part of the challenges that already Tim mentioned, is about the capacity buildings. No, because when we talk about around the world, there are not so much capacities around the world to quantify this type of things. I mean, for people that are not involved in these things, to read a guideline, it's not so easy to understand how to put it in practice. No, talking about the complexity, the technology that you use. So I think that LEAP now has a really important role. Not looking what happened yesterday about the global methane pledge. So we need something that we need to follow all together around the world and have the same metrics to put it in practice. So in the future, I realize that LEAP has a really important role to keep on doing, to put all people together, all different stakeholders together, to talk the same language and put it all in practice.
Thank you very much. And as you can see, we could have continued that discussion for much longer. There's so much of this expertise we have in our sector around this panel table. So thank you all, and hopefully we'll have another occasion to continue the conversation on or offline. I'd like to invite Mrs. Shirley Tarawali, current chair of the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock and Assistant Director General of the International Livestock Research Institute, to present some remark. So could the room manager please start the video?
Thank you all for joining this important and exciting session, all part of multiple practical initiatives to address climate challenges. As chair of the Multi-Stakeholder Partnership, the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, or GASL, we're really pleased to have LEAP as one of the technical networks. And my organization, a One CGIAR Center, ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, is also pleased to have been part of some of LEAP's technical work. As I believe you can tell from today's short session, LEAP is a network that is really delivering. And I think today's session has highlighted a number of important dimensions. The controversy around what and how to measure livestock GHG emissions, and how important the work of LEAP is in that regard. The huge variation in livestock production, systems, commodities, regions, which means we need different emission parameters, different solutions. That every part of the sector needs to take action, but with the diversity exemplified today, it's not all the same action. Important also to highlight, as shown in LEAP's work and guidelines, that there is a great potential for multi-win actions for climate as well as other environmental dimensions, but also touching on food, nutrition, livelihoods. In some livestock systems, there are opportunities for carbon sequestration, perhaps making livestock one of the few sectors with an opportunity to contribute towards mitigating its own emissions. All of these require a multi-stakeholder approach to work, because as well as the technical measurements and solutions, we need a multitude of institutional and policy dimensions to be incorporated if such solutions are really to go to scale and make an impact. Let's not forget as well, in the world's rangelands, well-managed livestock production is often the only option to produce nutritious food and potentially enhance environmental services, while at the same time those are the areas most threatened by climate change, through droughts, through heat stress impacting on the animals, or temperature changes, changing disease dynamics. And for 200 million people, that impacts their livelihoods and their well-being. So congratulations to the organizers of today's event. Thank you all for participating. And I hope that you've seen the promise for technical expertise coming from networks like LEAP, combining with multi-stakeholder processes to give real opportunities for livestock sector actions to be part of climate solutions.
Thank you very much, Shirley. And I will try to sum up in a few words. But what I've heard today is the working together based on science and methodology to ensure positive contribution and well-managed livestock that contribute to environmental impact, but also to contribute to healthy diets and improve livelihood. We could actually say that LEAP as a coordinated global initiative to accelerate the sustainable development of livestock system and to support evidence-based climate action, while contributing to the UN SDGs and the Paris Agreement objective. I'd like to echo Mrs. Semedo's invitation to government, private sector, and other stakeholders to engage in LEAP. You can use the LEAP guidance documents to demonstrate evidence-based climate solution in your country. You can share the result through the LEAP Catalogue of Applications, and you could boost uptake of such solution. Stay tuned for the result of our work on methane. That will actually be reviewing a lot of the solution that we've discussed today. So that will be very important for you to stay informed of that. I'd also like to invite you to a side event tomorrow called the Raising Ambition on Climate Action in the Global Dairy Sector to achieve the Paris Agreement that is scheduled at 11:30 GMT tomorrow. I would like to thank all the speakers, the LEAP Secretariat, and IMS and IDF for their contribution for today's event. And thank you all for joining us today, despite the technical challenges, to have that amazing conversation. It is a very important event of COP26, just to show that livestock is solution, livestock is engaging, dynamic, and we want to continue to play a role for the planet and the people. So thank you, all of you, and I wish you a good COP26 and safe travel for those who've been there in person. Take care. Thank you very much.